In February of 2014, two men had quite a brazen scheme. You see, they were really into art by a certain artist, a certain street artist, and so they made a plan, an art heist. But not your average art heist, it was street art, after all. Welcome to Capers and Cocktails, a true crime podcast that doesn't take itself too seriously and gives you something to enjoy while you listen. The following content may be disturbing to some. Discretion is advised. If you're enjoying one of our themed cocktails, ensure you're of legal drinking age and have fun, but drink responsibly. Today's drink is absolutely my favorite drink that I made for the first time this season. To be fair, this drink is usually a Christmas time drink, so I've read, but we were headed to one of my favorite cities in the world for today's episode, so I needed to find a new and different New Orleans drink to try. Just enjoy this drink in the air conditioning. The milk punch evidently has been around for a long time, like 400 years, a long time. The formula is simple. Some kind of milk, some kind of spirit, and some kind of sweetener. In a rather gross variation, in my opinion, you can add fruit juice to the milk, which will curdle the milk, and then you filter out the curdles, leaving what they call a clarified milk punch. Mixologists swear by it, but for me, no thanks. Milk punches in general are credited to Aphra Behn, an English actress, poet, prose writer, and translator who lived in the mid-17th century. Being a woman, she was quite the societal abnormality, but her propensity to defy gender norms and apparently invent delicious cocktails made her a role model for female writers of the future, and I guess Capers and Cocktails podcasters of the future. Ben Franklin even had his own version of the ancient cocktail that included beer and whiskey. Ben apparently liked a stiff drink. The Brandy milk punch had its beginnings in New Orleans, and at least according to Brennan's, a local NOLA joint that's been around for around 80 years, it was perfected there. I'm not hopping into the origin debate, I just suggest that you give it a sip. For the cocktail version, we will take 2 parts brandy, 1.5 parts heavy cream, 1 part simple syrup, and 1 teaspoon vanilla, and add those to a shaker filled with ice. Shake the shaker until chilled and strain into a glass filled with fresh ice. Top with a garnish of nutmeg. Just a note on the mocktail version, I chose to do whiskey instead of brandy because whiskey in general has a stronger flavor, and because it's the non-alcoholic version, I wanted something that would stand stronger next to the cream. So for our mocktail version, take 1 part non-alcoholic whiskey, 1 part grape juice, and 1.5 parts of heavy cream. Don't worry, it won't curdle because we're using cream and not milk. And add those to a shaker with ice along with a teaspoon of vanilla. Shake until chilled and then strain over fresh ice. Add that dash of nutmeg as a garnish and enjoy at a brunch near you. A famous British street artist, political activist, and social critic goes by the name Banksy. Banksy has been able to stay anonymous throughout his work, although some people, they think they know who he is, but no one knows who he really is. His unique style of graffiti art, which often combines stenciling with strong images and clever slogans, has made him one of the most important and controversial artists of our time. Banksy's art often addresses political and social problems. Business, consumerism, war, poverty, and government surveillance are all fodder for Banksy's political statements through art. His writings often have humorous or thought-provoking messages that question rules and institutions. Banksy's work can be seen all over the world, on city walls, buildings, in art shows, and even at auctions. Girl with a Balloon, which shows a young girl reaching for a heart-shaped balloon, is one of his most well-known works. The picture, painted in London, has been copied and changed in many ways, and it has become a well-known sign of hope and innocence. Love is in the Bin, which used to be called Girl with a Balloon, is another famous piece of art. In 2018, it made news when it partially shredded itself right after being sold at auction. The fact that Banksy is unknown adds to the mystery and interest of his work. It has given him a lot of freedom and kept him out of trouble with the law, since graffiti art is usually against the law in many places. His obscurity has also led to rumors and ideas about who he really is, but so far he's been able to keep it a secret. It's worth noting that Banksy's works are often met with controversy, with critics branding them as vandalism, while fans appreciate the artist's ability to shed light on societal issues through his creations. In August 2008, 3 years after Hurricane Katrina caused considerable amounts of destruction and devastation, Banksy secretly visited New Orleans. The artist left about 15 paintings made by using spray paint on a stencil against the still torn up cityscape of New Orleans, which he used to make powerful statements about the situation. Most of them have been gone for a long time, but they are still around in many ways. Banksy's art expressed pity, anger, and an accusatory response to the lack of help and slow cleanup efforts after the disaster. One such piece of art was titled Umbrella Girl, aka Nola. Just off the beaten path of the French Quarter, it sits alongside several Banksy works and some from ordinary graffiti artists on the corner of Caroline and Rampart Street, on the corner of a building that looks to be a long-abandoned building once called the Drop-In Center. It's less than a mile from the current location of the Tulane University School of Medicine's drop-in center for runaway and homeless youth, so my guess is that the center was once housed in this now abandoned building. The image of Nola tagged on this building by Banksy is powerful, and if you're not watching on YouTube, I highly encourage you to check out the links in the description box to see the image. I'll do my best to describe it. The black and white scene shows a young girl in a dress standing under a black umbrella with one hand out to feel the rain. But the rain is coming from under the umbrella itself, soaking her. This striking image of a girl being soaked by rain from inside her umbrella is a reference to Hurricane Katrina, which was made worse by the fact that flood barriers that were supposed to protect people from such a disaster didn't work. An umbrella's main purpose is to keep the person using it dry and safe from the weather. The fact that the rain is coming from inside the umbrella instead of the sky is Banksy's way of showing the viewer that things or institutions that were made to protect us can sometimes do the opposite. This is harsh criticism of FEMA and the government response to protect and help the people who were affected directly by Hurricane Katrina. He didn't mince his words, or in this case, his imagery. And though it seems that Banksy never takes his own art too seriously, he is probably the world's most well-known and celebrated graffiti artist, and is without a doubt one of the most influential artists of the 20th and 21st centuries. And undoubtedly his art is worth a pretty penny. Before The Girl with the Balloon shredded, it had sold for $1.4 million. After, it sold for a record $25.4 million. That's more than 18 times what the spray paint on canvas piece sold for in 2018 when it was still whole. It's also more than 3 times what the highest estimate from the auction house was before that sale. Not bad for a prank. Art is wild, man, and art collectors are wilder. But back to the poor girl getting soaked under her umbrella in New Orleans. It seems like a couple of would-be art thieves had their eyes on the chunk of cinder block wall that bore the elusive Banksy work. On Friday, February 21st, 2014, waves started crashing on social media. Neighbors of the girl started taking photos of a wide gap above the painting concealed by a plywood screen. One neighbor decided to investigate and encountered a man sitting in a rental truck nearby. When asked about the situation, the rental truck guy replied, quote, "Oh, the picture is going to London for a big show," end quote. Neighbor and photographer Cheryl Gerber even captured the moment and shared it on Facebook, saying, "Bye-bye, Banksy, my neighborhood's most famous little girl is moving to London." But that seemed a bit fishy. Not impossible, because there have been instances in the 30 years since Banksy arrived on the scene that murals have been removed whole from buildings and either put somewhere else, disposed of, or sold, but fishy nonetheless. Wouldn't it be news in New Orleans, or at least in the Marigny neighborhood where she lived? Concerned, and I have to say rather bold neighbor, Clay LePérouse, confronted the suspects and asked for their permits to work on the building. However, they couldn't provide any valid documentation and instead claimed that the building's owners wanted to send the painting to a museum. Sensing something was off, Clay took matters into his own hands, calling the police and reaching out to every authority he could think of in the whole city. In the midst of it all, he also put his actual physical body by the mural, ensuring its safety as much as he could. and some locals snapped photos of at least one of the suspects, a one Christopher Sensabaugh, Los Angeles resident and bold-ass art thief. Christopher claimed to be a private art handler, hired to send the mural to the Tate, England's National Gallery for a Banksy retrospective. He was photographed both behind the wooden screen the men had put up and also sitting in that rental truck. The 31-year-old would eventually have a warrant issued for his arrest on charges of attempted theft and criminal damage to property from the New Orleans Police Department. Evidently, the neighbors were enough to spook the men, so they took off. And in the end, the mural, along with the holes that were cut around it, remained intact, shielded by a new plywood barrier. A guard was stationed to protect the artwork for at least a while, ensuring its continued presence in the neighborhood. Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of Nola's struggles. They did eventually put plexiglass over the top of her as a more permanent protection, but sometime between Christmas Eve and the day after Christmas in 2020, a square hole was cut in that plastic plexiglass and she was tagged with red spray paint. The same night, another Banksy piece was tagged, and one of the tags on both of the works said Robbo, which is a reference to a dead English graffiti artist who had some sort of beef with Banksy. Even in death, the feud continued, it seemed. It was neighbors who came to the rescue of the Umbrella Girl once again, namely Carlos Fundora, a photographer and street art connoisseur himself. He used a sanding sponge and other tools to remove the red tagging. At first, neighbors were unsure what he was doing. He said, quote, "People in cars were yelling at me, thinking I was damaging it," end quote. His friends showed up to ensure his safety as he kept working to save little Nola. New plexiglass was put in front of her, and she's still there, her commentary on help never coming still as stark as ever. Christopher Sensabaugh nor anyone else were ever held accountable for their role in the attempted theft of the Umbrella Girl. No one was caught for her vandalism in 2020 either, which brings up an interesting point. Can something be vandalized that was already an act of vandalism to begin with? If you tag over a tag, are you really breaking a rule or law? When does something go from graffiti to art? Well, that's probably a longer question than we have time for today, but suffice it to say that Banksy is a world-renowned artist, whether he wants to be or not. So even though it's on a building, it doesn't make it fair game to tag or to steal. Thanks for hanging out with me. I've been to New Orleans a few times, but I had no idea that there were Banksy works even there. I probably didn't even know who Banksy was when I was in New Orleans, but the next time I head that direction, I'm definitely going to go and pay my homage to the Umbrella Girl. Be sure to head to the description box to check out all my links to social media. Follow Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, you know the whole drill. Capers and cocktails for most of them. The and is spelled out. I'll see you next week. And remember, there are always alternatives to stealing a piece of art off of the side of a building.